The Ethiopian Bible is a true spiritual treasure, a masterpiece that transcends the boundaries of what many know as the traditional Bible. Unlike the more widely known Western versions, which have 66 books, the Ethiopian Bible contains an impressive 88 books. These additional texts, like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, unveil stories so rich and profound they ignite the imagination. Just picture diving into narratives about cosmic battles, the role of angels, and grand prophecies that most people have never even heard of. But here's the big question. Why were these stories excluded? And what do they reveal about God and humanity? The unique nature of the Ethiopian Bible makes us reflect on the role of sacred texts that were, in a way, banned. Did you know, for instance, that the Book of Enoch describes a vision of fallen angels descending to earth and interacting with humans, resulting in the legendary Nephilim? These stories, which could easily be turned into blockbuster movies today, were deemed too controversial by the early Western Church. This not only makes us question the boundaries of what's considered acceptable in the Christian world, but also invites us to explore how different cultures and traditions interpret the Word of God. What's fascinating is that these so-called banned books aren't just fantastical tales. They carry profound moral and spiritual lessons. The Book of Jubilees, for example, encourages reflection on the importance of adhering to Mosaic laws. While many might see these laws as outdated, the book offers a perspective on how faith can shape everyday life. Think about how small spiritual habits like setting aside time each day for prayer or reading sacred texts can transform our connection with God and the world around us. You can't talk about the uniqueness of the Ethiopian Bible without highlighting how it has preserved texts that challenge the dominant narrative of Christianity. While the West rejected certain books, Ethiopia embraced them, keeping alive a tradition that connects believers to a broader interpretation of God's Word. And this raises another question. What are we missing out on by ignoring these works? This textual richness directly impacts religious practice. When someone reads the Book of Enoch and discovers detailed descriptions of the heavens, angelic battles, and divine judgment, they don't just gain a new perspective on spirituality. They feel closer to God. It's like these stories create a bridge between the human and the divine, something many people deeply long for. Moreover, the inclusion of these books in the Ethiopian Bible shows how humanity's history is deeply intertwined with the desire to understand the supernatural. Isn't it fascinating to think that, while the West excluded texts like these, Ethiopia considered them essential to the faith? This also highlights an important cultural difference. While some choose to simplify spirituality, others prefer to delve into its more complex and mysterious layers. The impact of these stories goes beyond religion. They also hold immense cultural and historical value. For instance, the Book of Jubilees functions like a time map, recounting biblical events with chronological precision. This not only helps scholars better understand the Bible, but also creates a sense of historical continuity that connects readers to past events. One reason the Ethiopian Bible stands out is its boldness in challenging norms. These additional texts are a powerful reminder that God often works in ways far beyond our comprehension. When we read about fallen angels, we're not just exploring a story. We're reflecting on the ongoing struggle between good and evil, a battle that, in many ways, still plays out within each of us. Interestingly, these banned books also reveal a side of God that's often overlooked, a God who operates in mystery and grandeur, one who reveals himself in ways that don't always fit into rigid doctrines. This perspective can be incredibly liberating for those seeking a more personal and direct connection with the divine. And here's where the real magic happens. By opening ourselves to texts like those in the Ethiopian Bible, we start to realize that spirituality is far richer and more multifaceted than we ever imagined. And this richness doesn't stop there, because, as we dig deeper, we uncover an even older and more fascinating story about how Christianity took root in one of the most unexpected places, Ethiopia. Ethiopia is hands down one of the most surprising places in the world when it comes to spirituality. You might have heard that the country adopted Christianity back in the 4th century, but what you probably didn't know is how massive that move was for the history of faith. While the Western world was still debating whether Christianity should become an official religion, Ethiopia was already translating the Holy Scriptures into Ge'ez, a language that still preserves God's Word in nearly untouched form. It's like they found a way to keep the essence of original Christianity alive. Picture this: a kingdom in the heart of Africa embracing Christianity long before most European empires even thought about it. This wasn't just some random decision. It was a bold statement of faith that stood the test of time. King Ezana of Axum, one of the great leaders of that era, didn't just adopt Christianity, he made it a cornerstone of his people's identity. To put that into perspective, think about what this meant. While other nations were still laying their religious foundations, Ethiopia was already establishing itself as one of Christianity's first strongholds. What makes this story even more mind-blowing is that Ethiopia managed to preserve sacred texts that were either rejected or forgotten by the West. For example, their translations into Ge'ez, a liturgical language still in use today, allow these texts to be read almost exactly as they were over 1,000 years ago. Isn't it wild to think that someone could be reading the Book of Jubilees or the Book of Enoch the same way an Ethiopian Christian did back in the 4th century? This historical connection makes you stop and think about the value of preserving traditions. In a world where everything seems to be changing at lightning speed, Ethiopia shows us the importance of keeping the roots of faith alive. Have you ever paused to consider what it really means to protect something so ancient and valuable, even in the face of centuries of challenges and change? It's like safeguarding a treasure that can't be measured in material terms, but holds immeasurable spiritual worth. Another highlight is the strength of Ethiopia's Christian community. Despite facing persecution and external pressures throughout history, they've stood firm in their faith. To them, the Bible isn't just a book, it's a guide to life, a testament to their connection with God. This dedication shows up in their practices, like extended periods of fasting, liturgical chants, and an unshakable devotion. There's something incredibly powerful about knowing an entire nation found strength in its faith, even when the odds were stacked against them. And here's the kicker: this story of resilience isn't just some historical footnote. Today, millions of Ethiopian Christians still follow teachings established centuries ago. They remind us that when we center God in our lives, we can overcome just about anything. Have you ever wondered how your life might change if you focused more on your spirituality? What's even cooler is that Ethiopia's adoption of Christianity wasn't just a religious milestone, it was a cultural one too. By translating the Bible into Ge'ez, Ethiopians created a legacy that goes beyond faith. They ensured that God's story, as told in the Bible, would be accessible to future generations. And honestly, doesn't that make you think? How often do we neglect the importance of preserving what truly matters? For those who think the Bible is just a book, Ethiopia's story is a powerful reminder that it's so much more. It's a source of wisdom, a bridge between generations, and proof that God works in every corner of the world. Whether you're in the West or in Africa, God's message is universal, but the way it's preserved varies across cultures. When we look at Christianity's impact on Ethiopia, it's clear that it didn't stop at religion. Faith shaped the country's art, architecture, and even politics. Rock-hewn churches like the ones in Lalibela are living proof of what's possible when a nation dedicates itself to God. It's not just about spirituality, it's about using that faith as a transformative force. And finally, Ethiopia's story leaves us with a powerful lesson. When we embrace spirituality authentically, we create something that stands the test of time. That same strength connects Ethiopia's adoption of Christianity to its unique role in safeguarding biblical artifacts, like the legendary Ark of the Covenant. Among the most fascinating mysteries of biblical history, few capture the imagination quite like the Ark of the Covenant. According to Ethiopian tradition, the Ark, the legendary artifact said to contain the tablets of the Ten Commandments, written by God himself, was brought to Ethiopia by Menelik I, the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This story, beyond being utterly intriguing, serves as a cornerstone of Ethiopia's spiritual and cultural identity, positioning the nation as a divine guardian of one of Christianity's most sacred symbols. Now imagine this. Menelik, raised with the wisdom of Solomon, decides to visit his father in Jerusalem. During his stay, he receives a revelation that changes the course of history. The Ark of the Covenant is to be taken to Ethiopia. According to tradition, this wasn't theft, but a divine plan to protect the Ark, keeping it safe from the constant invasions and wars in the region. For Ethiopians, this isn't just a story. It's evidence that God entrusted their nation with a sacred mission. What's even more fascinating is that to this day, many believe the Ark is housed in the Church of St. Mary of Zion in the city of Axum. Only one dedicated guardian, known as the Zabarnacle, is allowed to access it. This guardian devotes their entire life to protecting the Ark, living in isolation and prayer. That kind of devotion is a powerful reminder of what it truly means to commit yourself to God. Honestly, how many of us are ready to dedicate our lives to something bigger than ourselves? And even though the Ark's existence in Axum has never been confirmed, it doesn't lessen the impact of this belief. If anything, it strengthens the faith of Ethiopians, creating an unbreakable bond between their history and spirituality. That conviction is inspiring for anyone looking to understand the role of faith in their own life. It's not about concrete evidence, it's about what you believe and how that belief shapes who you are. The connection between the Ark and Ethiopia also carries fascinating historical implications. For centuries, Ethiopian tradition has reinforced the idea that their nation is a special place, chosen by God. This belief has given Ethiopians a unique identity and a remarkable spiritual strength, helping them endure countless challenges throughout history. From foreign invasions to periods of famine, their faith in Ethiopia's divine role as a guardian has been a cornerstone of resilience. And it doesn't stop there. The presence of the Ark, or at least the belief in it, has influenced Ethiopian architecture and religious rituals. Take the rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, often referred to as the New Jerusalem. These structures symbolize the central role of faith in Ethiopian culture. They're not just buildings, they're living testimonies of a devotion that spans centuries. Another intriguing aspect is how the story of the Ark connects us to a deeper spiritual truth. God chooses unexpected places and people to fulfill his purposes. Ethiopia, a country often overlooked or underestimated by the Western world, stands as one of the great pillars of biblical history. It makes you wonder, are we paying attention to the roles God has called us to play? Or are we missing opportunities to live out something extraordinary? On top of that, the story of Menelik and the Ark reminds us that the greatest responsibilities often come with the greatest challenges. Being the guardian of the Ark isn't just a privilege, it's a burden. Just as Ethiopia carries this responsibility, we all have missions in our lives that may seem daunting, but bring us closer to God. What are the arks you've been called to protect in your life? Ultimately, this Ethiopian tradition invites us to look beyond the visible. Even if you never lay eyes on the Ark yourself, faith in its existence can inspire actions and choices that reflect God's presence in your life. The story of the Ark is, at its core, a story about trusting God, even when you don't have all the answers. And it's that very trust that sets the stage for the next chapter in Ethiopia's spiritual journey, the banned books, which offer an even richer perspective on the relationship between heaven and earth. Among the most intriguing texts in the Ethiopian Bible are the so-called banned books, works that were excluded from the traditional Bible in much of the world. These books, like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, are packed with stories and themes that are as mysterious as they are fascinating. They dive into topics ranging from fallen angels to divine judgment, not to mention prophetic visions that still seem to echo today. But why were these texts left out? And what can they teach us about God and how we see the world? Take the Book of Enoch, for instance. It paints a universe where angels aren't just passive beings carrying out God's will. Nope, these angels fall from grace by defying their creator, giving rise to a race of giants known as the Nephilim. This narrative, blending mystery with tragedy, unveils a side of creation that Western Christian traditions often overlook. And it's not just a simple tale of good versus evil. It invites us to think about the fragility of creation and how even the highest beings can fall. Then there's the Book of Jubilees, which feels like a divine journal, retelling biblical events in greater detail and with a chronological spin. It emphasizes the need for obedience to Mosaic laws and highlights the importance of covenants between God and humanity. Imagine rewriting your own life story, where every decision and moment aligns with divine principles. That's what this book invites us to consider. Life as a journey, where every choice either draws us closer to or farther from God. While these themes are undeniably powerful, they were considered controversial by the early Christian leaders in the West. The idea of angels interacting so directly with humans or absolute adherence to Mosaic laws didn't align with emerging doctrines. But for Ethiopian Christians, these texts were never an issue. In fact, they're an integral part of their faith. And it makes you wonder, are we sometimes limiting our spirituality by rejecting what feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable? What makes these books so compelling is the depth of their messages. The Book of Enoch, for example, isn't just about fallen angels. It's also a metaphor for humanity's struggle with temptation and pride. How many times do we face situations where we must choose between the easy but wrong path and the hard but right one? This internal battle is something we all face, and these texts remind us we're not alone in it. Moreover, these banned books are a powerful reminder that God works in ways we don't always understand. The Book of Jubilees, with its focus on eternity, challenges us to think beyond the here and now. It's a bit like planting a tree. You might not see the fruit, but others will. Are we living in a way that leaves a legacy for those who come after us? The exclusion of these texts from the traditional Western Bible also raises questions about how power and politics shape spirituality. Why were certain books chosen while others were left out? And what does that say about how we understand God? These aren't easy questions, but they push us to seek a more authentic connection with the divine. For instance, divine judgment, a theme that pops up often in these texts, is something we tend to shy away from, but it forces us to confront the reality of our choices and reflect on how we're living our lives. Are we ready to face the consequences of our actions? And more importantly, are we living in a way that honors God and the gifts He's given us? Another fascinating aspect is how these texts bridge the human and the celestial. They remind us that there's so much more to the universe than what we can see or touch. It's not about living in fear of the unknown, but about living with reverence. When we read about fallen angels or prophetic visions, we're called to reflect on God's grandeur and the role we play in His plan. At their core, these books aren't just about mysteries and revelations. They're about hope. They show us that even in the darkest moments, God is present, guiding us and offering us chances for redemption. That's a message we all need to hear, especially in times of doubt or struggle. Exploring these texts is just another step in understanding Ethiopia's role as a nation that preserved and protected traditions the Western world often overlooked. And this preservation sheds light on how faith can withstand external influences, a topic we'll dive into as we explore Ethiopia's resistance to colonialism. When we talk about Ethiopia, we're diving into a story of resilience, a nation that faced centuries of attempts at domination, but stood firm in its cultural and spiritual identity. At the heart of this resistance is the Ethiopian Bible, a powerful symbol of the country's spiritual independence. While other African nations were colonized and had their spiritual traditions reshaped or even erased by European powers, Ethiopia held its ground, keeping its practices and beliefs intact. That's not just a show of strength, it's a testament to God's central role in this nation's history. During the colonial era, most African nations were subjected to a version of Christianity, molded to fit the interests of colonial powers. But Ethiopia stood out as a beacon of authentic faith. Its Orthodox Church, with roots tracing back to the 4th century, never allowed external interference. The Ethiopian Bible, with its 88 books, became a symbol of this resistance. It represented the country's spiritual sovereignty at a time when many were losing their identities to foreign-imposed narratives. This resistance wasn't just theoretical. It was lived out in concrete actions. When colonial forces tried to impose their religious views, Ethiopia's spiritual leaders refused to budge. They saw their faith and their Bible as sacred inheritances, something that couldn't be altered or compromised. Can you imagine the courage it took to face those challenges, knowing that preserving their spirituality wasn't just for them but for future generations? The strength of Ethiopian faith is also evident in its rituals and practices. Unlike other nations forced to abandon their spiritual traditions, Ethiopia kept its liturgical ceremonies, fasting rituals, and even the architecture of its churches alive. Take the awe-inspiring rock-hewn churches of Lalibela, for instance. Each one stands as a living testament to a people who refuse to bow to outside pressures. Isn't it amazing to think that while the world around them changed, they remained unwavering in their devotion to God? What's more, the Ethiopian Bible symbolized something bigger than just spirituality. It represented freedom. While other countries succumbed to European narratives, Ethiopia used its faith to assert its autonomy. In a world where power is so often imposed through weapons or politics, Ethiopians showed that true strength comes from God and an unshakable belief in His plans. This spiritual independence also had a profound cultural impact. For centuries, Ethiopians have preserved not just their sacred texts, but also the Ge'ez language, which is still used in religious rituals today. It makes you wonder, how much do we value our own cultural and spiritual heritage? Are we safeguarding what really matters, or are we letting outside influences shape who we are? Ethiopian resistance didn't stop at European colonialism. Throughout its history, the country has faced countless threats, from foreign invasions to economic pressures. In every instance, their faith was their anchor. It wasn't just a personal belief, it was a national foundation. And it begs the question, what are we using as our anchor in times of difficulty? Ethiopia's example also teaches us something crucial about resilience. In a world where it's easy to be swayed by trends or what's popular, Ethiopians chose to stay true to God and their spiritual heritage. That challenges us to reflect on where we're placing our faith. Are we letting our beliefs be shaped by the world around us, or are we seeking a deeper, more authentic connection with God? You can't talk about this resistance without mentioning Ethiopians' profound trust in their divine mission. They believe they were chosen by God to protect His words and traditions. This belief has guided them for centuries and continues to do so today. Imagine living with that kind of clarity of purpose. How different could our lives be if we had the same confidence in the mission God has given us? Ultimately, Ethiopia's story of spiritual resistance is an inspiration for all of us. It reminds us that even in the face of adversity, faith can be the force that keeps us standing. And this faith isn't just an abstract idea. It's lived out daily in rituals, prayers, and the way they view the world. This lesson of courage and perseverance challenges us to reflect on what it truly means to trust in God, a message that resonates even more deeply when we consider the stories and traditions preserved in the Ethiopian Bible. After all this, one thing's for sure: the Ethiopian Bible is so much more than just a book. It's a gateway to a deeper understanding of God, humanity, and the universe. But here's the real question: what are you going to do with this knowledge? Will it just be another fascinating fact, or will you use it to explore a more authentic connection with God and your own spirituality? Think about the stories you've heard here: fallen angels, a nation that stood firm against the greatest, adversities and texts that challenge conventional narratives. Are we only viewing faith through the lens of what's comfortable and familiar? Maybe it's time to open our minds and hearts to what's been hidden, to what's been considered forbidden for so long. I want to know, what struck you the most on this journey? Is there something you're already thinking about changing in your life because of what you learned today? Drop a comment, because your opinion really matters. And before you go, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here we keep exploring the mysteries and secrets that few dare to uncover. More amazing videos are popping up on your screen right now. Click on one and keep this journey of discovery going. See you next time. And remember, knowledge transforms, but it's applying it that truly changes your life.